My name is Bethany. I am 33 years old and my entire life was dismantled on a quiet Thursday night. As a freelance data analyst, I make a living finding patterns. I look for anomalies, outliers, and hidden truths buried deep within spreadsheets. But I completely missed the massive deception happening right inside my own home. At exactly midnight, my phone lit up with a text message from Ruth. Ruth is my 70-year-old neighbor, a reclusive widow who rarely speaks to anyone but notices absolutely everything from her porch. Her message was not a friendly greeting. It read, "Bring Lily. Come to my back door right now, go straight upstairs, do not turn on any lights. Trust me, you will see." I carried my sleeping 5-year-old daughter across the freezing suburban lawn in the dead of night. When I reached Ruth's dark second-story bedroom and looked down through the skylights of my own house, I froze in shock. My husband was supposed to be in Chicago. Instead, he was standing in our living room with his mother and sister, committing a crime that would change my life forever. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had your trust completely shattered by the people you called family. The evening had started like any other mundane weekday. Jared, my husband of 7 years, had packed his sleek leather duffel bag that morning. He works as a regional sales director, a job that requires endless charisma and frequent travel. He kissed my forehead, ruffled Lily's hair, and complained about the impending turbulence on his flight to Chicago. I had smiled, told him to be safe, and spent the rest of the day analyzing retail datasets for a corporate client. I loved my work. It provided me with a solid income and the flexibility to be present for Lily. Jared and his family, however, always treated my career like a cute little hobby. They mocked my data-driven logic and constantly complained about my frugal habits. According to my mother-in-law, Barbara, and my sister-in-law, Monica, I was just the boring, naive wife who did not know how to enjoy the finer things in life. I put Lily to bed around 8 o'clock. I read her 2 books, tucked her under her favorite pink quilt, and left her door slightly cracked. The house was perfectly silent. I brewed a cup of chamomile tea and settled onto the couch with my laptop. By 11:30, my eyes were heavy. I closed my laptop, checked the locks on the front door, and prepared to go to sleep. I felt completely safe. I felt secure in my marriage, my home, and my life. That false sense of security was shattered 30 minutes later when the screen of my phone illuminated the dark bedroom. I stared at the text message from Ruth for a long time. Ruth and I had a quiet understanding. I sometimes shoveled her driveway in the winter, and she occasionally left fresh tomatoes from her garden on my porch. She was not the type of woman to send late-night texts, let alone cryptic urgent demands. My analytical brain immediately started running through possibilities. Was there a fire? Was someone breaking into my house? Was there a prowler in the neighborhood? But her instruction was specific. Bring Lily. Come to my back door. My heart hammered against my ribs. I threw off the blankets and rushed into Lily's room. I did not bother putting on shoes. I just grabbed a heavy wool blanket from the rocking chair and wrapped it tightly around my sleeping daughter. She felt so heavy in my arms, her head resting warmly against my shoulder. She stirred slightly, but did not wake up. I navigated down the stairs in complete darkness, guided only by memory. The hardwood floor was cold beneath my bare feet. I unlocked the back door as quietly as possible and stepped out into the freezing night air. The grass was damp with midnight dew, sending icy shocks up my legs with every step. The space between our houses was only about 50 feet, but it felt like miles. I kept my eyes fixed on Ruth's back door. It opened before I even reached the porch steps. Ruth stood there in the shadows, wrapped in a thick cardigan. She did not say a word. She just placed a finger over her lips, gesturing for silence, and motioned for me to come inside. The air inside Ruth's house smelled faintly of peppermint and old books. The darkness was absolute. Ruth reached out, placing a firm, surprisingly strong hand on my elbow to guide me. We walked through her kitchen and into the hallway. The wooden stairs creaked softly under our combined weight as we made our ascent to the second floor. My breathing sounded incredibly loud to my own ears. Lily shifted in my arms, letting out a soft sigh, and I patted her back to soothe her back into a deep sleep. When we reached the top of the stairs, Ruth guided me down a short hallway and into a bedroom at the back of the house. This room faced my property directly. Because Ruth's house was built on a slight incline, her second-story windows offered a perfect unobstructed view, looking down onto the roof of my home. Specifically, it looked right down into the large custom skylights that sat above my vaulted living room. Ruth gently directed me toward the window. She had already pulled back the heavy drapes. I laid Lily down on the plush rug near the door, keeping her wrapped tightly in the wool blanket. I crept toward the glass. The night was pitch black, but a bright golden square of light was glowing from my own roof. The light was pouring out of my living room skylights. I pressed my hands against the cold window pane and looked down. My breath caught in my throat. My living room was fully illuminated. The sheer white curtains that I kept drawn at night did nothing to block the view from this high angle. I could see straight down into the heart of my home. Standing right there in the middle of my living room was Jared. The husband who was supposed to be asleep in a hotel room in Chicago was standing on my expensive area rug. He was still wearing the clothes he had left in that morning, but the shock of seeing him there was quickly eclipsed by the realization that he was not alone. Standing next to him were two women. I recognized their figures instantly. It was his mother Barbara and his sister Monica. They were gathered around the large built-in bookshelf that spanned the far wall of the living room. My mind scrambled to make sense of the data it was receiving. The pattern was completely broken. Why was Jared home? Why were his mother and sister with him at midnight? Why were they all gathered in my living room while I was supposed to be asleep upstairs? The sheer audacity of their presence in my house at this hour made no sense. Ruth stepped up close beside me in the dark. She handed me a heavy, cold object. It was a pair of high-powered binoculars. I lifted them to my eyes and adjusted the focus dial. The image through the skylight snapped into terrifying clarity. I could see the expressions on their faces. Jared looked tense but determined. Barbara was holding a crowbar. Monica was holding a large canvas bag. I watched in absolute paralysis as my husband took the crowbar from his mother. He stepped up to the beautiful custom-built mahogany bookshelf that we had installed 2 years ago. He wedged the metal bar behind the trim and pulled hard. I could not hear the sound of the wood splintering, but I could see it. I watched my husband systematically destroy the wall of our living room. He was tearing away the drywall, exposing the hidden space behind the shelves. I knew exactly what was back there. It was the hidden wall safe I had inherited from my grandfather. A safe that contained antique jewelry, emergency cash, and highly sensitive legal documents regarding my inheritance. A safe that Jared was never supposed to have access to. The betrayal washed over me in freezing waves. This was not a random break-in. This was an orchestrated, deliberate theft conducted by the man I had promised to spend my life with. I lowered the binoculars, my hands shaking violently. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run back across the lawn, throw open my front door, and demand to know what they were doing. I wanted to tear them apart for violating my home and my trust. I took a step back toward the door, my maternal and territorial instincts screaming at me to fight. But Ruth caught my arm again. Her grip was like iron. She pulled me back toward the window and reached into the pocket of her cardigan. She pulled out a high-definition digital camera equipped with a massive telephoto lens. She pressed it firmly into my hands. "Anger gives them a warning," Ruth whispered, her voice barely a breath in the dark room. "Evidence gives you a guillotine." Her words hit me like a splash of ice water. The data analyst inside me woke up cold and calculating. If I ran over there now, they would make excuses. They would gaslight me. They would say they lost something, or they were looking for a leak or some other ridiculous lie. They would know that I knew, and they would cover their tracks. I would lose the element of surprise. I raised the camera to my eye. I turned it on, ensuring the flash was disabled, and hit the record button. The screen glowed softly as the camera captured the scene unfolding below. I watched through the digital viewfinder as Jared finally pulled the heavy safe from the wall. He set it on the coffee table. Barbara pulled a set of tools from the canvas bag and together they began to force the safe open. My heart pounded a steady, furious rhythm against my ribs. I kept the camera perfectly steady, zooming in to capture their faces clearly. I recorded every second of their betrayal. I watched them pull out my grandfather's velvet jewelry boxes. I watched Monica greedily open them, her face lighting up at the sight of the diamonds and gold. But the jewelry was not the worst part. I zoomed in closer as Barbara pulled out a thick stack of legal and financial documents from the bottom of the safe. She spread them out on the coffee table. Monica handed her a pen and a small ink stamp. Through the lens, I watched my mother-in-law practice signing my name on a scrap piece of paper. I watched her carefully stamp my forged signature onto the legal documents page after page, while my husband stood by and watched. They were not just stealing my jewelry, they were stealing my identity, my assets, and my future. My entire 7-year marriage had been a calculated long-term financial extraction. They had played me for a fool. I kept recording, gathering the data I would need to destroy them. The naive, submissive wife died in that dark room, and a completely different woman was born. I lowered the camera slightly, my muscles locking into place as the sheer adrenaline flooded my veins. The red recording light was the only indication that I had not turned to stone. Through the lens, the scene playing out in my own living room looked like a cinematic nightmare, yet it was unfolding with terrifying, methodical reality. Jared, the man who had promised to protect me, was currently wielding a heavy steel crowbar. The custom mahogany bookshelf, a piece I had commissioned just after Lily was born, spanned the entirety of the far wall. Jared wedged the flattened end of the crowbar directly behind the ornate crown molding. I could not hear the agonizing crack of the wood through the thick glass of the skylight, but the visual violence of it resonated in my teeth. He threw his weight backward, using his body as leverage. The heavy wood paneling splintered, tearing away from the drywall in jagged, violent chunks. Barbara, my mother-in-law, stood barely 2 feet away, holding a high-powered tactical flashlight to illuminate the destruction. She did not look shocked or concerned. Her face was fixed in a mask of grim determination. Monica, Jared's sister, bounced on the balls of her feet, clutching a massive, oversized designer tote bag, like a greedy child waiting for a piñata to burst open. Jared dropped the crowbar onto the plush Persian rug and reached into the gaping hole he had just created in the architecture of our home. He strained the muscles in his back, pulling tight beneath his shirt, and hauled out the heavy fireproof wall safe. My grandfather had left me that safe along with the house. It was supposed to be impenetrable, but Jared did not need to guess the combination. I watched with a sickening realization as he pulled a small folded piece of paper from his wallet. He had memorized or copied the passcode I kept hidden in my personal lockbox. He spun the heavy steel dial with practiced ease. The heavy metal door swung open. Monica practically shoved her brother out of the way. She reached into the dark cavity of the safe and began pulling out the dark velvet boxes that held my grandmother's heirloom jewelry. Diamonds, sapphires, heavy gold chains, pieces that had been in my family for 3 generations. She did not open them with reverence or care. She flipped the lids, her face illuminating with a sick, predatory glee as the jewels caught the light, and then dumped them unceremoniously into the bottom of her designer tote bag. Jared did not stop her. He did not look guilty. He simply reached deeper into the safe and pulled out a thick, heavy stack of manila folders. These were not just any folders. These contained the original deeds to the property, the authenticated copies of my grandfather's trust, my birth certificate, my social security card, and the high-tier financial portfolios I had meticulously managed for years. Barbara gestured toward the coffee table. Jared cleared away a stack of architectural magazines with a careless sweep of his arm, making room for his mother. Barbara laid the documents out in a neat, organized row. The light from the flashlight cast long, sinister shadows across the table. Monica reached into her tote bag again, but this time she did not pull out jewelry. She retrieved a small rectangular object and a heavy ink pad. It was a custom-made rubber stamp. I zoomed the camera lens in as far as the digital optics would allow, holding my breath to keep the frame perfectly steady. Barbara took the stamp from her daughter. She picked up a scrap piece of paper from the coffee table an old grocery receipt I had left there that morning. She pressed the stamp into the ink pad, then pressed it firmly onto the receipt. She lifted it, examined the impression, and nodded in satisfaction. She was practicing my signature. Through the high-definition viewfinder, the calculated precision of their crime was utterly suffocating. They were not acting out of spontaneous desperation. This was an orchestrated logistical strike against my identity. Barbara moved the stamp to the first official document. I watched the heavy, deliberate motion of her arm as she brought the stamp down onto the signature line. She pressed her weight into it, ensuring the ink transferred perfectly. Jared stood beside her, pointing to the next line, guiding his mother through the labyrinth of financial paperwork. Page after page, document after document, they systematically committed federal fraud. They were signing away my assets, binding me to commercial liabilities, and locking my name onto contracts I had never even seen. They spent over an hour finalizing the paperwork. When the last page was stamped, Jared carefully gathered the documents, tapping the edges against the glass coffee table to align them perfectly. He slid them into a sleek leather portfolio. Then the cleanup began. They worked with the synchronized efficiency of seasoned criminals. Jared retrieved a handheld vacuum from the hallway closet, my vacuum, and systematically sucked up the pulverized drywall and splinters of mahogany. He pushed the heavy bookshelf back against the wall, masking the hollowed-out cavity behind it. Monica wiped down the coffee table with a microfiber cloth, erasing any trace of the ink or their fingerprints. I kept recording until the very last moment. I watched them pull on their heavy winter coats, whispering quietly to each other, their faces relaxed and victorious. They slipped out the front door, vanishing into the freezing night, heading toward whatever vehicle they had parked out of sight. The living room below me went completely dark. Ruth reached out in the pitch-black bedroom and gently touched my shoulder. I finally stopped recording. I lowered the camera, my arms shaking with the delayed shock of the adrenaline leaving my system. Ruth took the device from my hands, popped the SD card out with a soft click, and locked it inside a heavy fireproof box on her nightstand. "They think they are untouchable," Ruth whispered into the darkness. "But they just handed you the key to their own prison cell." I did not say a word. I turned away from the window, scooped Lily up from the plush rug, and wrapped the wool blanket tightly around her small sleeping form. I walked back across the frozen lawn, the ice biting into my bare feet, but the cold could not penetrate the absolute blazing fury igniting in my chest. I slipped back into my house and locked the deadbolt. I walked upstairs, tucked my daughter safely into her bed, and walked into my own bedroom. I climbed under the heavy duvet, staring up at the dark ceiling. I did not sleep for a single second. I spent the remaining hours of the night building a mental database of every financial transaction, every argument about money, and every gaslighting comment Jared had ever made over the past 7 years. The data points finally connected. The picture they formed was horrifying, but for the first time in my marriage, I could see it with absolute clarity. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across my kitchen floor as I dried my face with a towel. The house was quiet again, but the silence felt entirely different now. It was no longer the peaceful calm of a safe suburban home. It was the absolute breathless stillness of a battlefield, just before the artillery strikes. Jared had gone upstairs to change out of his suit, humming a cheerful tune under his breath. He truly believed he had won. He believed he held my financial life and my maternal rights in his briefcase. I walked quietly to the hallway closet, pulled on my heavy winter coat, and slipped my boots onto my bare feet. I grabbed my encrypted phone from the counter and stepped out the back door into the freezing late afternoon air. The chill was sharp and biting, a welcome contrast to the suffocating heat of the confrontation I had just endured. I walked briskly across the frozen grass, making a straight line for Ruth's back porch. I did not have to knock. The heavy wooden door swung open just as my foot hit the bottom step. Ruth stood in the doorway wearing a thick wool sweater and holding a steaming mug of tea. Her eyes were sharp, scanning my face for any signs of actual panic. She stepped aside, letting me into the warmth of her kitchen, and quickly locked the deadbolt behind me. "They cornered you," Ruth stated. It was not a question. She had likely watched the vehicles speed into the driveway and seen the aggressive march to my front door. They staged an intervention, I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of the tears I had faked earlier. They threatened to call Child Protective Services. They threatened to have me committed to a psychiatric ward, using my history of postpartum depression as leverage. They demanded I sign over complete power of attorney so Jared could unlock the frozen accounts and finalize the fraudulent mortgages. Ruth set her mug down on the counter with a sharp ceramic clack. The hardened lines of her face tightened. "And what did you do?" I cried. I replied smoothly. "I begged them not to take my daughter. I acted completely broken. Then I signed the document using a fictitious middle name and the wrong year, rendering the entire contract legally void. I told them I needed the weekend to rest and process before handing over everything else." A slow, dangerous smile spread across Ruth's weathered face. The older woman nodded in profound approval. "You gave them exactly enough rope to hang themselves. Excellent. Now we build the gallows." Ruth ushered me into her dining room. The large oak table was entirely cleared of its usual lace tablecloth and floral centerpieces. Instead, it was covered in pristine legal pads, several locked briefcases, and an espresso machine. Ruth was not just a nosy neighbor. I was beginning to realize that the quiet, reclusive widow next door was a woman with a vast and formidable history. "Sit down," Ruth commanded, pulling out a chair. "I told you last night that anger gives a warning, but evidence gives a guillotine. You have the video of the break-in. You have the digital footprint of the fraudulent loans. And now you have an attempted extortion using a voided legal document. It is time to bring in the heavy artillery." Ruth picked up a sleek, older model cell phone from the table and dialed a number from memory. She put the call on speakerphone and set it between us. It rang twice before a crisp, authoritative female voice answered. "Ruth, I assume this is not a social call." "It never is, Evelyn," Ruth replied, her tone shifting into a sharp professional cadence. "I have a situation requiring your immediate attention. Grand theft, serial forgery, identity theft, attempted extortion, and a coordinated scheme to defraud a federal financial institution. The targets are incredibly arrogant and deeply careless." "My favorite kind," Evelyn replied, the sound of a keyboard clacking loudly in the background. "Who is the client?" "My neighbor Bethany Miller. The primary antagonist is her husband Jared Miller, along with his mother and sister. We have video evidence of them breaking into a wall safe, stealing heirloom assets, and physically stamping forged signatures onto commercial loan applications." The typing on the other end stopped instantly. "You have video of the actual forgery occurring?" Evelyn asked, her voice dropping an octave in sheer predatory delight. "High definition," I spoke up, leaning closer to the phone. "And I have the IP logs showing they initiated a fraudulent second mortgage on my house, plus a massive commercial credit line for a failing boutique. I froze the credit bureaus this morning, which prompted them to ambush me an hour ago. They threatened to have me committed to a psychiatric facility and take my child if I did not sign a power of attorney document to unfreeze the accounts." A low, dark chuckle echoed through the speaker. "Oh, they are going to burn beautifully," Evelyn said. "Bethany, I am Evelyn Vance. I am a forensic divorce attorney, and I specialize in dismantling financial predators. Ruth and I go back 30 years to our days in corporate litigation. If Ruth vouches for you, you are under my protection now. How much time do we have?" "I bought us the weekend," I answered. "They think I am completely broken. They think they won. They are going to spend the next 48 hours relaxing, believing that come Monday morning, they will have total control of my assets." "Perfect," Evelyn said sharply. "Bethany, I need you to gather every single piece of data you have. I want tax returns, bank statements, the IP logs, the video files, and a detailed timeline of their boutique's failing financials. I will draft the divorce filings, the emergency custody orders for your daughter, and the protective orders. But we are not stopping at family court. This is federal fraud. I am calling my contacts at the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. We are going to package this up and hand it to them with a bow on top." "There is one more thing," I interjected, a new piece of data clicking into place in my mind. While I was pulling their financial records last night, I noticed a massive cash outflow from Monica and Barbara's boutique accounts. They have been paying for caterers, event planners, and deposits at the Oak Ridge Country Club. They are hosting a huge charity gala next Friday night. Ruth frowned, crossing her arms. A charity gala? Why would failing business owners throw a massive party? My analytical brain raced through the spreadsheets I had memorized. Because it is not a charity gala. I realized the horrifying truth suddenly crystal clear. I looked at the guest list they were compiling in the shared family drive. It is a targeted list of wealthy local socialites and business owners. They are not asking for charity. They are soliciting investments. They are trying to create a localized Ponzi scheme to cover the massive debts they accumulated in my name. They are going to use the fraudulent loans they took out against my house to show fake liquidity and lure these people into investing in their boutique. The silence on the phone was absolute. Then Evelyn spoke, her voice radiating absolute chilling authority. They are soliciting investments across state lines using fraudulent collateral. That elevates this to wire fraud and a federal sting operation. Bethany, we are not going to serve them quietly in a lawyer's office. If they want to throw a gala to steal from the community, we are going to let them host it. And then we are going to drop the guillotine right on the main stage. The plan formed rapidly, a flawless fusion of legal strategy and cold data analysis. I spent the next 4 hours sitting at Ruth's dining room table, securely transferring every megabyte of evidence to Evelyn's encrypted servers. We drafted timelines, mapped out the financial network of the boutique, and highlighted every single fraudulent transaction Jared had ever facilitated. By the time I walked back across the dark lawn to my house, the adrenaline was humming in my veins. I slipped back through the back door and quietly made my way upstairs. Jared was in the master bedroom, lying on his back, watching a sports game on the television. He looked completely relaxed. He looked like a man who believed he owned the world. "Feeling better, babe?" Jared asked, not even bothering to look away from the screen as I walked into the room. I paused at the foot of the bed. I looked at the man who had slept beside me for 7 years. The man who had planned to strip me of my child and lock me in a psychiatric ward just to steal my grandfather's money. "Much better," I said, my voice soft, smooth, and perfectly compliant. "I just needed a little time to clear my head." "You were right, Jared. I should leave the big picture to you." He finally looked away from the television, shooting me a smug, patronizing smile. "I told you. I have everything under control. Just relax this weekend. We have that big gala for my mother's boutique next Friday. You need to look your best. We have a lot of important people to impress." "I will be ready," I promised, turning to walk into the bathroom to hide the predatory smile spreading across my face. The trap was fully set. The bait was in place. Jared and his family were going to spend the next week building their grand, fraudulent empire. And on Friday night, under the bright lights of the Oak Ridge Country Club, I was going to burn it to the ground. The cold morning light crept through the kitchen windows, casting long, sharp shadows across the hardwood floor. I stood alone in the center of the living room, a microfiber cloth gripped tightly in my hand. Jared, Barbara, and Monica had done an efficient job of cleaning up their midnight demolition, but efficiency was not perfection. As a data analyst, my entire career was built on finding the microscopic errors that others overlooked. I dropped to my knees and ran my fingertips along the baseboards beneath the heavy mahogany bookshelf. There it was. A faint powdery residue of crushed drywall, completely invisible unless you knew exactly what you were looking for. I carefully wiped it away, erasing the last physical trace of their crime. I needed the house to look immaculate. I needed the illusion of our domestic bliss to remain entirely undisturbed. I walked to the kitchen and began preparing breakfast. The rhythmic chopping of fruit and the loud hum of the coffee maker grounded me. When my 5-year-old daughter Lily patted down the stairs, rubbing sleep from her eyes and clutching her stuffed rabbit, I greeted her with the exact same warm smile I wore every single morning. I poured her juice, packed her lunchbox, and walked her to the school bus stop at the end of the street. I waved until the yellow bus turned the corner, my heart aching with a fierce protective instinct that burned hotter than the freezing winter air. I walked back into my empty house, locked the door, and spent the next 10 hours in my home office. I did not do my usual freelance work. Instead, I meticulously mapped out the financial destruction my husband had orchestrated. I built spreadsheets that would serve as his absolute ruin. At 6 o'clock that evening, the heavy front door swung open. Jared dropped his sleek leather duffel bag in the entryway with a loud, theatrical sigh. I wiped my hands on a kitchen towel, pasting on the bright, welcoming expression of a naive, loving wife. I walked into the foyer to greet the man who had robbed me blind less than 18 hours ago. "How was Chicago?" I asked. My voice was light, cheerful, and completely devoid of the venom coursing through my veins. Jared pulled me into a brief obligatory hug and kissed my cheek. He smelled of expensive airport lounge cologne and mint breath spray. "Brutal," he said, loosening his designer silk tie with a weary groan. The flight was delayed, the regional managers were completely unreasonable, and the hotel bed completely wrecked my back. I am just so glad to be home. I just want a home-cooked meal and a quiet night with my girls. I nodded sympathetically, taking his heavy winter coat and hanging it in the closet. I marveled at the sheer sociopathy required to stand in the home he had burglarized hours earlier and complain about a fictional hotel bed. I handed him a glass of iced water. "Dinner is almost ready," I told him. "Just roasted chicken and the root vegetables you like. Go relax for a minute." 20 minutes later, we were seated at the dining room table. The lighting was warm, the food was steaming, and the scene looked like a picturesque advertisement for modern suburban happiness. But the facade cracked before Jared even finished his first serving. He casually pulled his phone from his pocket, opened our joint banking application, and let out a sharp, disappointed sigh. He set the phone face up on the polished wood table and looked at me with an expression of patronizing patience. "Bethany, we really need to talk about your spending habits," Jared began. His tone was measured, designed to sound reasonable and mature. "I saw the credit card statement from yesterday. You spent over $200 at the children's boutique. We are trying to build a secure future here, and you are buying premium winter boots for a 5-year-old who is just going to outgrow them by next season. You need to be far more mindful of the household budget." I stared at him across the table. The man who had just stolen tens of thousands of dollars in heirloom jewelry and forged legal documents to rob my grandfather's safe was sitting in my dining room, lecturing me about the price of winter boots for his own daughter. I kept my hands folded neatly in my lap, digging my fingernails into my palms to maintain my composure. "I am sorry, Jared," I said, keeping my voice soft and deliberately submissive. "The winter is going to be harsh this year, and her old boots were falling apart. I just wanted to make sure she was warm." Jared shook his head, reaching across the table to pat my hand condescendingly. "I know you mean well, honey. I really do. But you lack financial discipline. You have never understood the value of a dollar because you have never had to run a real business. You sit in your home office and play with your little data spreadsheets all day for freelance clients. But managing real long-term household wealth takes a different kind of logic. You need to look at the big picture." The irony was so thick it was almost suffocating. He thought my career as a senior data analyst was just a cute little hobby. He fundamentally misunderstood that my entire profession revolved around tracking anomalies, exposing corporate fraud, and following digital paper trails. He genuinely believed he was the smartest person in the room. "Look at my mother and Monica." Jared continued cutting into his chicken with a silver knife I had bought him for our anniversary. "They run an actual storefront. They manage inventory, handle vendors, and deal with real economic pressures. My mother built her boutique from the ground up through sheer sacrifice and financial intelligence. You could learn a lot from Barbara about how to stretch a dollar and invest in things that actually yield returns." My analytical brain silently countered every single lie spilling from his mouth. I knew exactly how Barbara and Monica ran their failing boutique. I had spent the entire day reviewing the commercial loan applications they had fraudulently secured using my social security number. Their store was a running joke in the community, a vanity project that sold overpriced silk scarves to local socialites while hemorrhaging money every single month. They had zero financial intelligence. They were surviving solely by treating me as a limitless, automated teller machine. Jared took a sip of his wine, warming up to his favorite subject. He loved to tear me down under the guise of helping me improve. He loved to remind me that without him, I would be lost in the real world. It has always been this way with you, Bethany. Even when we were dating, you did not understand how to leverage assets. When your grandfather passed away and left you that house, you just wanted to sit on it. You did not understand that real estate is a tool. You have to put your capital to work. Thank God you have me to manage the heavy lifting. I am trying to build an empire for us, and I need a wife who is a partner, not a financial liability. The history of our relationship flashed through my mind, completely reframed by the midnight revelation. When we met, I was a 26-year-old woman with a fully paid-off home inherited from a loving grandfather and a steadily growing career. Jared had swooped in, charming and attentive, presenting himself as a successful businessman who wanted to protect me. He convinced me that my financial conservatism was actually ignorance. He convinced me to let him handle the major accounts while I focused on paying the daily utility bills and grocery runs from my income. He had isolated my assets, belittled my intellect, and systematically drained my resources to fund his family's delusions of grandeur. I looked at his handsome, lying face. I looked at the man who had essentially handed his mother the keys to my life. "You are absolutely right, Jared," I said softly, pouring him another glass of wine. "I guess I just do not see things the way you do. I get so caught up in the small details of my spreadsheets that I miss the bigger strategy. I really appreciate you looking out for our family's future. I promise I will do better. I will leave the big financial decisions to you from now on." Jared smiled, a wide, genuinely pleased expression that made my skin crawl. He took a long drink of his wine, basking in the glow of my total submission. He believed he had broken my spirit. He believed his gaslighting was working flawlessly. He thought he was building an empire. He had no idea I had already spent the morning rerouting my liquid assets into untraceable offshore accounts. He had no idea I had placed hard freezes on my social security number, rendering the forged documents he and his mother had stamped completely useless. He was sitting at my dining room table, drinking my wine, eating the food I prepared, and entirely unaware that his financial lifeline had just been severed. The game had fundamentally changed. I was no longer the naive wife he could manipulate with a few sharp words and a condescending pat on the hand. I was the architect of his impending destruction, and I was going to enjoy watching every single piece of his fraudulent life burn to the ground. Later that night, the house settled into a deep, oblivious silence. I listened to the heavy rhythmic breathing coming from the master bedroom, ensuring Jared was fully asleep. I slipped out from under the duvet, grabbed my encrypted work laptop, and glided silently down the stairs to my home office. I locked the door behind me and turned on a single desk lamp. It was time to dissect the monster. As a senior data analyst, I spent my days constructing complex financial models for corporate clients. I knew how to follow the money. I knew how to find the digital threads that people tried to bury. I routed my connection through a secure virtual private network and pulled up the high-definition images from the midnight video. I zoomed in on the loan applications Barbara had been aggressively stamping with my forged signature. The first document was a massive, high-interest commercial line of credit. The borrower was listed as Elegance and Grace, LLC, the official corporate name of Barbara and Monica's boutique. I opened a background tab and accessed state business registries and public financial filings. It took me less than 20 minutes of scraping data to uncover the horrifying truth about their business. The boutique was not just failing, it was a financial black hole. They had defaulted on 2 previous small business loans, and multiple local vendors had filed civil complaints against them for unpaid invoices. They were drowning. And the commercial loan they were currently applying for, the one guaranteeing hundreds of thousands of dollars, listed me as the sole personal guarantor. They had stolen my social security number, my pristine credit score of 820, and my clean financial history to act as a human shield against their impending bankruptcy. But the commercial loan was only half the nightmare. I pulled up the second document from the video. It was a home equity line of credit HELOC application. The property listed as collateral was my house, the home I had inherited free and clear from my grandfather. Jared and his mother had submitted paperwork to take out a massive second mortgage, effectively extracting the equity I had spent years protecting. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I dug deeper, bypassing standard consumer portals and accessing deeper financial verification databases. The sheer audacity of their crime left me breathless. Jared had not just stolen my identity. He had actively forged my W-2s and tax returns to artificially inflate my income for the loan officers. He had created a flawless, fictitious financial profile designed to secure maximum capital. If the boutique defaulted on the commercial line, which the data proved was an absolute certainty, and they failed to make the payments on the second mortgage, the bank would legally seize my home. Jared had handed his mother the deed to my life. I spent the next 3 hours building a master spreadsheet of their crimes. I cataloged every fraudulent application, every forged signature, and every piece of stolen data. I cross-referenced the dates of the forged documents with Jared's calendar, proving premeditation and conspiracy. I was mapping out the exact anatomy of a federal felony. By the time I closed my laptop at 4 in the morning, the picture was crystal clear. My husband was not just a manipulative narcissist, he was the architect of a sprawling financial fraud scheme. And I had every single piece of data required to bury him. Monday morning arrived with the crisp, unforgiving clarity of a winter freeze. Jared kissed my cheek at 7:30, his briefcase in hand, humming a cheerful melody as he headed out the door to his office. He looked like a man who had the world on a string, completely oblivious to the fact that I held the scissors. I waved from the porch, waiting until his car turned the corner before I walked back inside and locked the deadbolt. I went straight to my home office, booted up my encrypted laptop, and watched the final phase of my financial squeeze execute flawlessly. Over the weekend, I had initiated the transfer of my liquid assets, but today was the day the transactions officially cleared. I watched the progress bars on my dual monitors. My business income, my emergency savings, and the substantial cash reserves from my grandfather's inheritance flowed out of our domestic joint accounts. The digital currency traveled through a labyrinth of secure, untraceable offshore accounts that Evelyn had helped me establish. I left exactly $240 in the primary household checking account. It was enough to buy a week of basic groceries, but entirely useless for funding a fraudulent suburban empire. Next, I opened the portals for Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. I verified that the hard freezes I had placed on my social security number were absolute and impenetrable. I added secondary authentication protocols, meaning not a single line of credit could be opened, modified, or accessed without a biometric scan and a direct phone call to my private cell phone. I watched the green confirmation checkmarks illuminate my screen. The vault was officially sealed. I leaned back in my chair, sipping my black coffee, and waited for the chaos to begin. The first domino fell at exactly 1:15 in the afternoon, right in the middle of the lavish lobby at the Serenity Springs Day Spa. I knew this because I was monitoring the declined transaction alerts on my phone. Monica, Jared's entitled sister, had booked a premium VIP package for herself and 3 of her most sycophantic friends. They had spent the morning indulging in hot stone massages, gold leaf facials, and champagne pedicures, all charged to the commercial credit line she and Barbara had fraudulently opened using my stolen identity. Monica strutted up to the marble reception desk, glowing from the expensive treatments wrapped in a plush white robe. She laughed with her friends, playing the role of the successful, wealthy boutique owner. She casually pulled the heavy platinum card from her designer wallet and slid it across the counter to the receptionist. The young woman at the desk swiped the card through the terminal. The machine beeped a sharp, flat tone of rejection. The receptionist frowned, apologized politely, and swiped it again. Another flat beep. The screen flashed a red error message indicating the transaction was blocked. Monica sighed loudly, rolling her eyes and apologizing to her friends for the inconvenience of dealing with incompetent staff. She demanded the receptionist manually enter the card numbers, insisting her account had a limit of over $50,000. The receptionist complied, typing the numbers meticulously. The terminal processed the request for 3 agonizing seconds before spitting out a small receipt that read, "Transaction declined. Account suspended. Contact issuing bank." Monica's friends stopped laughing. The awkward silence in the spa lobby was deafening. Monica snatched the card from the counter, her face flushing a deep, angry crimson. She pulled out her cell phone, put it on speakerphone to prove to her audience that this was just a banking error, and dialed the elite customer service line. A bank representative answered promptly. Monica aggressively threw her weight around, demanding to know why her premium business card was being rejected over a trivial $2,000 spa bill. The representative asked for her security PIN. Monica provided it. The representative typed for a moment before delivering the fatal blow. The voice over the speakerphone was crisp, clinical, and completely devoid of sympathy. The representative informed Monica that the primary guarantor of the account had initiated a comprehensive fraud alert. The entire credit profile had been locked down by the major credit bureaus. All associated cards, lines of credit, and withdrawal privileges were frozen indefinitely, pending a federal fraud investigation. The representative advised Monica that any further attempts to use the card could result in legal action. Monica stood frozen in the middle of the luxury spa. Her friends stared at her, their expressions shifting from polite sympathy to thinly veiled judgment. The illusion of Monica's wealth evaporated in an instant. She was forced to ask her friends to split the massive bill, enduring the absolute crushing humiliation of handing over her portion in whatever cash she could scrape from her purse. She ran out of the spa, her face burning, and immediately called her mother. Across town, panic was spreading like a virus. Jared sat in his plush regional director office, leaning back in his ergonomic leather chair. He opened his laptop to authorize a massive wire transfer. He needed to pay the $20,000 catering deposit to the Oak Ridge Country Club for the upcoming charity gala. He confidently navigated to the commercial loan portal, the same portal he had illegally accessed using my forged signature just a few nights prior. He typed in the transfer amount, selected the destination account, and clicked Submit. The screen refreshed. A bright red banner appeared at the top of his dashboard. Account suspended. Access denied. Jared frowned, assuming it was a temporary glitch. He refreshed the page. The red banner remained. A cold sweat broke out across the back of his neck. He picked up his desk phone and dialed the direct line to his private banker. When the banker answered, Jared put on his best authoritative voice, demanding the wire transfer be pushed through manually. The banker cleared his throat, his tone apologetic but firm. He informed Jared that the primary account holder had enacted a hard security freeze across all financial platforms. No funds could be moved, no credit could be drawn. The account was dead in the water. Jared hung up the phone, his breathing turning shallow and rapid. The walls of his comfortable office suddenly felt like a prison cell. He frantically logged into our personal joint checking account, intending to pull the catering deposit from my emergency savings to cover the gap. He watched the screen load. The available balance stared back at him in bold black numbers. $240. He clicked over to the high-yield savings account. $0. He checked the investment portfolios. Completely empty. The reality of his situation crashed down on him with the force of a freight train. The limitless financial reservoir he had been tapping into for 7 years was gone. The money he needed to fund his mother's fraudulent gala, the money he needed to maintain his fake suburban empire, the money he had literally broken into a wall to steal, it had all vanished. He was completely broke, and he was staring down a mountain of debt that he could no longer hide behind my pristine credit score. His cell phone rang, vibrating violently against the glass surface of his desk. It was Barbara. He answered it, bracing himself. His mother's voice was shrill, bordering on hysterical. She screamed that Monica had just called her crying from the spa. She screamed that their boutique vendors were calling about bounced checks. She demanded to know what was happening with the bank. Jared tried to calm her down, but his own voice shook. The financial lifeline had snapped shut and they were in freefall. I sat in my home office watching the digital chaos unfold through my secure dashboard. I tracked the failed login attempts. I watched Jared try to access the offshore accounts he did not even have the passwords for. I watched the frantic, desperate digital footprints of a family realizing their entire fraudulent ecosystem was collapsing. I took another sip of my coffee, the dark roast tasting sweeter than it ever had before. Outside, I heard the screech of tires. I walked to the window and looked down at the street. Jared's car swung violently into our driveway, braking so hard the vehicle skidded slightly on the frosty pavement. He threw the car into park and leapt out, slamming the door behind him. Seconds later, Barbara's SUV pulled up right behind him, parking haphazardly on the curb. Barbara and Monica piled out of the vehicle, their faces pale, furious, and completely panicked. They marched up my front walkway like a desperate cornered pack of wolves. I calmly closed my laptop, ensuring the screen locked automatically. I stood up, smoothed down the front of my sweater, and walked out of my office. I headed toward the kitchen, putting on the mask of the clueless, innocent wife. I grabbed a sponge and began wiping down the granite countertops, humming softly to myself. The front door burst open. The hinges groaned as Jared shoved it wide. Heavy footsteps pounded across the hardwood floor of the foyer. Jared, Barbara, and Monica stormed into the kitchen. They surrounded the kitchen island, their breathing ragged, their eyes wild with terror and rage. The financial squeeze had worked perfectly. They were suffocating and they had come to demand oxygen. But I had no intention of letting them breathe. The trap was springing shut and the real confrontation was about to begin. The kitchen island suddenly felt like an interrogation table. Jared slammed his hands down on the granite, his knuckles turning white. He opened his mouth, clearly ready to unleash a torrent of rage, but Barbara quickly stepped forward and placed a restraining hand on his forearm. I watched the silent, frantic communication pass between them. Barbara's eyes widened slightly, a tactical warning. They could not bully me into submission if they wanted my signature on a legal document. They needed me compliant. They needed me to believe they were acting out of love. I watched in morbid fascination as they collectively swallowed their panic. The transformation was seamless and terrifying. Jared took a deep, shuddering breath, forcibly relaxing his posture. The fury in his eyes dissolved into a mask of profound, agonizing concern. Monica immediately softened her stance, crossing her arms and adopting an expression of deep sisterly sympathy. Barbara moved around the kitchen island, pulling out a bar stool and gesturing for me to sit with a gentle maternal wave. I kept the sponge in my hand, widening my eyes to feign confusion. "What is going on?" I asked, allowing my voice to tremble just enough to sound genuine. "Why are you all looking at me like that?" "Bethany, sweetheart, please sit down," Barbara cooed. Her voice was thick with manufactured honey. "We are here because we love you. We are here because we are incredibly worried about you." I slowly set the sponge down and took a seat. Jared immediately knelt on the floor beside my stool, taking both of my hands in his. His palms were clammy slick with the cold sweat of a man whose financial crimes were catching up to him, but his face was the picture of a devoted, terrified husband. "Honey," Jared began, his voice cracking with artificial emotion, "you have not been yourself lately. We have all noticed it. The stress of your freelance work, the long hours you spend staring at those spreadsheets. It is taking a toll on your mind. You are burning out, Bethany." I stared at him, letting my mouth fall open in practiced disbelief. "What do you mean? I am perfectly fine. I just finished wiping down the counters." "This is exactly what we mean," Monica chimed in, stepping closer, so the three of them formed a tight claustrophobic semicircle around me. "You think everything is fine, but you are exhibiting highly erratic behavior. Do you even remember what you did this morning?" I looked at Monica, playing the part of the bewildered wife, trying to search her own memory. "I walked Lily to the bus stop. Then I came home and worked." Jared squeezed my hands tightly, shaking his head with a sorrowful, dramatic sigh. "You logged into our bank accounts, Bethany. You transferred all of our savings, all of our emergency funds into strange, unverified accounts. You froze your own credit profile. You locked down our entire financial life. Do you not remember doing that? I let out a soft, staged gasp, pulling my hands away from him and pressing them to my mouth. I did freeze the credit, I stammered, making my eyes dart frantically between the three of them. But I had to. There was fraud. Someone was trying to take out loans in my name. I saw the alerts. I had to protect us. The lie was perfect. It was close enough to the truth to be plausible, yet framed as a paranoid delusion. Jared and Barbara exchanged another rapid, calculated look. They had their opening and they drove a wedge right into it. Bethany, there was no fraud, Barbara said, her voice dropping to a soothing therapeutic whisper. She reached out and stroked my hair, a gesture that made my entire body want to recoil. Jared checked the accounts yesterday. Everything was perfectly secure. You are hallucinating financial threats. You are seeing enemies that do not exist. It is the data analysis work, Jared added, standing up and wrapping an arm around my shoulders. He pressed his face into my hair, playing the role of the tragic, supportive spouse. You spend all day looking for anomalies, Bethany. You have driven yourself into a state of severe paranoia. You are projecting your work stress onto our real life. You think someone is attacking us, but the only person destroying our family's security right now is you. The sheer audacity of their gaslighting was breathtaking. They were standing in the home they had tried to mortgage out from under me, wearing clothes bought with my money, and looking me dead in the eye to tell me my reality was a symptom of mental illness. If I had not seen the midnight video, if I had not spent the entire day tracking their digital theft, I might have actually believed them. Their performance was that good. They had clearly used this tactic before, slowly eroding my confidence over the past 7 years, making me second-guess my own financial instincts. But today, their psychological warfare landed on impenetrable armor. I kept my breathing shallow and rapid, mimicking the onset of a panic attack. But I know what I saw, I whispered, letting a single tear spill over my eyelashes and track down my cheek. I know someone was trying to steal from us. I had to move the money to keep it safe. You are not keeping it safe, Bethany, Monica said, leaning in so her face was inches from mine. You are destroying Jared's ability to provide for you. He tried to pay the household bills this afternoon and his card was declined. You are putting your own daughter's shelter at risk because you are suffering from a manic delusion. We need to get you help, sweetheart. Barbara murmured, taking my hand and rubbing her thumb across my knuckles. We are your family. We are not angry with you. We know you are not in your right mind. You are sick, Bethany. This extreme paranoia, this obsession with protecting assets that are not actually in danger. It is a severe mental break. I let out a ragged sob, burying my face in my hands. The data analyst inside me was taking meticulous notes, observing their strategy, documenting every single lie they constructed. They needed me to believe I was crazy, so I would willingly surrender my autonomy. What is happening to me? I cried through my fingers, ensuring my voice sounded completely broken. Why am I doing these things? It is okay, Jared shushed me, rubbing my back in slow, deliberate circles. It is going to be okay. We caught it in time. We are going to get you the best medical care possible. You just need to step away from the stress. You need to stop worrying about the numbers, the bills, and the accounts. You need to let me carry the burden. He stepped back and looked at his mother. Barbara smoothly reached into her oversized designer tote bag. The same tote bag she had used to carry my stolen jewelry out of my living room just hours ago. She pulled out a thick manila folder and set it on the kitchen island. Jared opened the folder. Inside was a dense stack of legal paperwork. The bold black letters at the top of the first page read, "Durable Power of Attorney." "We spoke to a lawyer this afternoon," Jared said, his voice dripping with faux reluctance, as if this was the hardest thing he had ever had to do. "After you initiated the lockdown, the bank flagged your behavior as highly erratic. They advised me that the only way to protect our household, the only way to ensure Lily has food on the table and the mortgage gets paid while you recover is for you to grant me full financial control." I stared at the documents, my eyes wide and wet. "You want me to sign over everything?" "It is just temporary," Bethany Monica insisted quickly. "Just until you get your head straight. You cannot be trusted to manage the money right now. You literally drained our accounts based on a hallucination. If you do not let Jared fix this, we are going to lose the house. It is for your own good, Bethany, Barbara added, tapping a perfectly manicured fingernail against the signature line. You are not well. You need to focus on resting. Jared will handle the bank. He will reverse the offshore transfers. He will unfreeze the credit bureaus. He will make sure our family survives your little breakdown. All you have to do is sign and the nightmare ends. They pushed a heavy silver pen across the granite countertop. It rolled smoothly, stopping right against my trembling hand. They were surrounding me, cutting off my exit routes, creating a physical and psychological cage. Their eyes were locked onto my face, waiting for the final snap of my sanity. They thought they had engineered the perfect ambush. They thought they had convinced me that my own mind was a treacherous, broken machine. I looked down at the silver pen. I looked at the power of attorney document that would give Jared the legal authority to bypass my security freezes, finalize the fraudulent mortgages, and bleed my entire life dry. I knew what the next phase of their plan was. I knew that if I hesitated, they would escalate. They would bring out their heaviest ammunition to force my hand. I kept my head bowed, my shoulders shaking with manufactured sobs, waiting for them to play their final, most despicable card. I let the silence stretch. I stared at the heavy silver pen resting against the granite countertop, making my hands shake violently enough that my knuckles rapped against the cold stone. I needed them to push. I needed them to cross the point of no return so that when I finally dropped the hammer on them, the legal system would see an airtight case of extortion. Jared let out a sharp breath, his facade of the patient husband beginning to fracture completely. He tapped his fingers on the island with aggressive impatience. Bethany, pick up the pen. Jared urged, his voice dropping an octave into something much colder. We do not have all night to coddle you. The bank needs these forms processed first thing tomorrow morning. I whimpered, shrinking away from the document. I cannot. I do not understand what is happening. I just want to keep us safe. That was the trigger. Barbara stepped forward, invading my personal space entirely. She placed both of her hands flat on the counter, trapping me between her arms. The cloying scent of her heavy floral perfume coated the back of my throat, making me feel physically sick. When she spoke, the manufactured sweetness was completely gone. Her tone was surgical, calculated, and ruthless. We are done playing games, Bethany, Barbara stated flatly. You are going to sign that paper, or we are going to make a phone call that will end your life as you know it. I looked up, letting genuine shock mingle with my fake tears. What phone call? Barbara leaned in until her face was inches from mine. She locked her eyes onto mine, and she brought out the weapon they had been keeping in reserve for 5 years. We are going to call Child Protective Services, she whispered. And then we are going to call the state psychiatric hospital. My breath hitched. The mention of the hospital sent a very real, very cold shiver down my spine, though not for the reasons she thought. 5 years ago, after Lily was born, I suffered a severe bout of postpartum depression. It was a terrifying, isolating period of my life. My hormones had crashed. The sleep deprivation was absolute, and I had struggled to bond with my newborn daughter. I had sought professional treatment. I had gone to intensive therapy. I had taken the medication, put in the grueling emotional work, and healed completely. It was a medical condition that I had conquered with quiet dignity and resilience. But to Jared and his family, my vulnerability had never been a medical issue. It had been a liability. And now they were transforming my past trauma into a loaded gun. The cruelty of their strategy was breathtaking. They had waited patiently, saving this deeply personal pain to use against me when they needed total compliance. You remember what happened after Lily was born? Barbara continued, her voice slicing through the kitchen like a razor. You completely lost your mind, Bethany. You were crying in the closets. You could not feed her. You were completely detached from reality. Jared had to step in and save that baby from your incompetence. That was a vile, disgusting lie. Jared had spent those months working late and avoiding the house, leaving me to handle the newborn entirely alone while I was drowning in severe depression. He had complained repeatedly that my crying was ruining his sleep schedule, but I bit my tongue and let a fresh wave of tears spill down my cheeks. That was postpartum depression, I cried softly. It was a chemical imbalance. The doctor said it was normal. I got better. I have been fine for years. I am a wonderful mother to Lily. You were never fine, Monica snapped from across the kitchen, rolling her eyes in disgust. You just got better at hiding your crazy from the world. But we saw it. We all saw it. You are emotionally fragile. You are unstable. And today proves that you have completely relapsed. You are having a full psychotic break. You cannot even differentiate between reality and your own paranoia. Jared placed a heavy hand on my shoulder, pinning me to the bar stool with aggressive force. My mother is right, Bethany. I covered for you 5 years ago. I hid your insanity from the neighbors. I hid it from your clients. I protected your professional reputation so you could keep working and bringing in money. But I cannot protect you anymore. You drained our bank accounts today because of a hallucination. You are a danger to this family. You are a massive danger to our daughter. The invocation of Lily's name made my blood run ice cold. This was no longer just about the money or the forged signatures on the loan applications. They were directly threatening my child. The data analyst inside me recognized the pure, unadulterated extortion taking place, while the mother inside me wanted to grab the heavy granite cutting board and smash it into my husband's smug face. I forced myself to remain completely still, shrinking into myself and playing the role of the terrified, cornered prey to perfection. What are you saying? I choked out, wrapping my arms around my own torso as if trying to desperately hold myself together. I am saying that if you do not sign that power of attorney right now, I am taking out my phone, Jared said, his voice terrifyingly calm and steady. I am going to call Child Protective Services. I am going to tell them that my wife has suffered a massive relapse of her postpartum psychosis. I am going to tell them that you have drained all our financial resources in a manic episode and that you are no longer capable of providing a safe, stable environment for a 5-year-old child. Barbara smiled, a thin, cruel stretching of her lips that made her look entirely demonic under the kitchen pendant lights. And we will back him up, Bethany. Monica and I will testify under oath. We will tell the social workers that you have been acting erratically for months. We will tell them you hear voices. We will show them the empty bank accounts as absolute proof of your manic destructive behavior. They will take Lily away from you tonight. You will never see her grow up. You will be completely alone. Monica leaned against the stainless steel refrigerator, examining her manicured nails with feigned boredom. And while Child Protective Services is taking Lily, Jared is going to call the emergency psychiatric hotline. We are going to have you placed on an involuntary 72-hour psychiatric hold. We will tell the paramedics you are in immediate danger to yourself and others. By the time you get out of the padded room, Jared will already have emergency full custody granted by a family court judge. You will be locked out of this house, locked out of your daughter's life, and permanently locked out of your own bank accounts. They had planned this flawlessly. If I had actually been the naive, fragile woman they thought I was, this threat would have utterly destroyed my entire world. A mother faced with the prospect of losing her child to the state will do absolutely anything to prevent it. They knew that. They were banking their entire fraudulent empire on my maternal desperation. They were holding my daughter hostage to force me to hand over the keys to my grandfather's inheritance. They were willing to shatter a little girl's life just to keep their boutique running. I looked at the three of them, the absolute monsters standing in my kitchen. There was no love here. There was no family. There was only bottomless greed stripped of all its polite suburban disguises. They were parasites willing to destroy a mother and child just to keep their failing boutique open and their luxury spa days fully funded. Jared tapped the silver pen against the granite countertop. The sharp clicking sound echoed in the tense silence of the kitchen, ticking down the seconds like a metronome. This is your only warning, Bethany. You have two choices. You pick up this pen, you sign the document, and we go back to being a happy, normal family. You get some rest, I fix the banking glitch, and nobody has to lose their daughter. Or you refuse and I make the phone calls right now. I take Lily, I commit you to the psychiatric ward, and I take control of the finances through the courts anyway. The only difference is whether you get to stay in this house or not. He pushed the paper closer to me. The signature line stared up at me, a blank space waiting for my complete surrender. Barbara crossed her arms, her eyes gleaming with triumphant malice. Monica smirked, already picturing the newly unlocked credit lines and the designer shoes she would buy tomorrow morning. They were so confident in their cruelty. They had calculated every angle except one. They did not know they were threatening a woman who had already spent the entire day consulting with a ruthless forensic attorney and a former corporate litigator. They did not know I had already secured my daughter's safety with emergency custody drafts sitting on Evelyn's desk. I let out a loud theatrical wail. I hunched over the counter, burying my face in my arms, and sobbed uncontrollably. I cried until my chest heaved, ensuring my performance was entirely convincing. I needed them to believe I was completely broken. I needed them to believe their extortion had worked perfectly. I slowly lifted my head. My face was red, my eyes were swollen, and my hands shook uncontrollably as I reached out to take the silver pen from my husband. The heavy silver pen felt cold against my palm. I gripped it with both hands, letting the metal slip awkwardly against my fingers to ensure my trembling appeared authentic. I looked up at Jared, letting out a fractured, high-pitched gasp that echoed off the granite countertops. "Please," I whimpered, keeping my voice small and incredibly frail. "Please do not take Lily away from me. I will do whatever you want. I just want to stay with my daughter. Do not call the hospital, Jared, please." Jared's chest puffed out with a triumphant, sickening pride. He had won, or so he believed. He reached out and stroked my hair, a gesture that took every ounce of my willpower not to violently reject. "Shush now, Bethany," he murmured, adopting the tone of a benevolent savior, rescuing a hysterical child. "Nobody is taking Lily anywhere. Nobody is calling the authorities. We just needed you to see reason. We needed you to understand that you are not capable of handling these big responsibilities right now. You just need to sign the paper, let me take the wheel, and go upstairs to rest." I nodded frantically, wiping away the tears that stained my cheeks. "I am so tired," I sobbed, leaning heavily against the island, as if my legs could no longer support my own weight. "You are right, Jared. I am so overwhelmed. The data, the spreadsheets, the bills. It is all too much for my brain right now. I just need a few days to sleep. I need the weekend to just process everything and breathe. Will you please just let me rest this weekend?" Barbara stepped back, exchanging a victorious, knowing glance with Monica. The older woman crossed her arms, her diamond bracelets clinking softly against each other. "Of course you can rest, sweetheart," Barbara cooed, though her eyes remained entirely devoid of warmth. "That is exactly what we have been trying to tell you. You are exhausted. You have driven yourself into a state of sheer panic over absolutely nothing. Jared is going to handle the bank tomorrow morning. He will reverse those ridiculous freezes you put on the accounts. He will fix the mess you made, and you can just focus on being a quiet, calm mother to Lily." Monica let out a sharp, dismissive sigh, clearly bored now that the climax of their ambush had passed. "Honestly, Bethany, you should be thanking us," she sneered, examining her manicure. "Any other husband would have actually called the psychiatric ward after the stunt you pulled today. Jared is doing you a massive favor by keeping this in the family. Just sign the document so we can all move on with our lives. I have vendor meetings in the morning, and this little meltdown of yours has been incredibly draining." I looked down at the thick legal document resting on the kitchen island. The bold heading reading, "Durable Power of Attorney," seemed to mock me under the bright pendant lights. This was the document that would grant Jared absolute unrestricted control over every single asset I possessed. It would allow him to bypass the security freezes I had established. It would authorize him to finalize the fraudulent second mortgage on my house and inject massive amounts of stolen capital into his mother's failing boutique. They believed this single sheet of paper was the master key to their suburban empire. What they did not know was that during my years as a freelance data analyst, I had audited financial records for a highly successful corporate defense attorney. We had spent hours discussing the intricacies of contract law, specifically the microscopic details that determine whether a binding legal document is actually enforceable. I knew exactly how compliance officers at major federal banks authenticated power of attorney submissions. They looked for absolute perfection. They matched signatures to existing bank records with ruthless precision. A single deliberate discrepancy could trigger a secondary review, rendering the document legally void until the primary account holder verified it in person. I kept my head bowed, letting my hair fall forward to shield my face. My hands shook violently as I positioned the silver pen over the blank signature line. Jared tapped the paper impatiently. "Right there on the bottom line, Bethany. Make it legible. The bank needs to be able to read it." I took a ragged breath and pressed the pen to the paper. I began to write my name, but I deliberately altered the mechanics of my signature. I usually signed with a sharp, fluid, cursive stroke. This time I gripped the pen awkwardly, forcing my handwriting to look jagged, hesitant, and entirely inconsistent with the signature the bank had on file. I made the letters slightly larger, breaking the flow of the cursive so it looked like the handwriting of a heavily medicated or deeply distressed person. But a messy signature was not enough to guarantee rejection. I needed a fatal error. As I reached the middle of my name, I seamlessly inserted a fictitious middle initial. My legal name was Bethany Rose Miller. I signed the document as Bethany Claire Miller. I blended the letter C into the cursive so naturally that a casual observer would never notice the addition, but a bank-compliant software scanning for exact legal matches would flag it instantly. Finally, I moved to the date line. The current year was printed clearly at the top of the document, but I needed to ensure this contract was completely worthless. With a trembling hand, I wrote the month and day correctly, but I intentionally wrote the wrong year. I dated the document for a year that had already passed. In the eyes of a federal financial institution, a power of attorney dated retrospectively featuring an incorrect legal name and an unverified signature pattern was not just invalid. It was a glaring red flag for potential coercion. I let the silver pen slip from my fingers. It clattered loudly against the granite countertop. I pushed the document toward Jared, keeping my eyes fixed firmly on the floor. "I did it," I whispered, my voice thick with manufactured defeat. "I signed it. Please just let me go to sleep now." Jared snatched the paper from the counter with terrifying speed. He did not bother to scrutinize the signature. He did not check the date or the middle initial. He was entirely blinded by his own arrogance and greed. He saw ink on the line, and his mind immediately fast-forwarded to the money he believed he had just unlocked. He folded the document carefully and slid it into the breast pocket of his tailored suit jacket, patting it flat with a sickeningly triumphant smile. "Good girl," Jared praised, his tone dripping with condescending satisfaction. "See, that was not so hard, was it? You did the right thing for our family, Bethany. Now go upstairs, take a hot shower, get some sleep. I will take care of Lily in the morning, and I will handle the bank before I head into the office. You do not have to worry about a single financial decision ever again." Barbara stepped forward, her diamond earrings catching the light as she picked up her oversized designer tote bag. She looked at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated victory. "We will see ourselves out," she announced, her voice brisk and cheerful. "Rest up, Bethany. You look absolutely dreadful. We need you looking presentable for the charity gala next Friday. We have a lot of wealthy investors coming to the country club, and Jared needs his wife looking stable and supportive." Monica scoffed, adjusting the collar of her expensive cashmere coat. "Honestly, just put some concealer on those bags under your eyes," she muttered. "I cannot believe we had to spend our evening dealing with this drama." "Come on, Mom. We need to finalize the catering menu for the gala now that Jared has the funding secured." Jared walked his mother and sister to the front door, leaving me alone in the kitchen. I stood perfectly still, listening to the muffled sounds of their self-congratulatory farewells. I heard the front door open, the rush of freezing winter wind sweeping into the foyer, and the heavy, solid thud of the door closing behind them. The deadbolt clicked into place. Jared walked back toward the kitchen, pausing at the base of the stairs. "I am going to grab a drink in the living room and watch the end of the game," Jared called out, not even bothering to look back at me. Go to sleep, Bethany. Do not come downstairs again tonight. I did not answer him. I simply turned and walked slowly up the wooden staircase, keeping my head bowed and my shoulders slumped until I reached the master bedroom. I closed the door behind me and locked it with a quiet, satisfying click. The moment the lock engaged, the facade of the terrified, broken wife completely vanished. I straightened my posture, rolling my shoulders to release the physical tension of the performance. I walked into the attached master bathroom, turned on the cold water faucet, and aggressively splashed my face, washing away the remnants of my fake tears. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were sharp, bright, and completely devoid of fear. I had done it. I had survived their ambush, protected my daughter from their extortion, and handed them a worthless piece of paper that would buy me the exact amount of time I needed. Jared was going to walk into the bank tomorrow morning, feeling like a king. He was going to confidently hand that document to a loan officer, expecting the vault doors to swing wide open. Instead, he was going to hit a bureaucratic brick wall. The bank would reject the voided signature. The compliance department would refuse to lift the security freezes. Jared would spend the next week panicking, making excuses to his mother, and scrambling to find a way to fund their fraudulent charity gala. They believed they had won the war, but they had simply stepped blindly onto the trapdoor I had built for them. I dried my face with a towel, a cold, predatory smile spreading across my lips. The strategic retreat was flawlessly executed. The decoy was in play. Now I had exactly 1 week to assemble my team, finalize the federal indictments, and prepare for the most spectacular public reckoning my husband and his family could possibly imagine. I turned off the bathroom light, fully awake and ready to bring the guillotine down. The sun had barely breached the horizon on Saturday morning when I slipped out of the house. Jared was snoring loudly, exhausted from the psychological warfare he believed he had successfully executed. I tucked Lily into her winter coat, whispering that we were going on a secret breakfast mission. We walked across the frost-covered lawn to Ruth's back porch. The morning air was freezing and biting against my skin. Ruth opened the door before I even knocked, ushering us into the warmth of her kitchen. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air. She guided Lily to a small table near the bay window, handing her warm pastries and a new coloring book. Once Lily was happily distracted, Ruth turned to me. Her eyes were sharp. I simply nodded. The decoy signature was in his pocket, and my phone had captured every single threat they made in that kitchen. I pulled my encrypted phone from my pocket and set it on Ruth's kitchen island. Before Jared and his family had cornered me the previous night, I had activated a continuous audio recording app. The device had captured the entire vicious intervention with crystal-clear precision. It captured Barbara explicitly threatening to call Child Protective Services with fabricated allegations. It captured Monica threatening an involuntary psychiatric hold. It captured Jared using my past medical history as a weapon for financial extortion. Ruth pressed play and listened to the audio playback. Her face hardened into a mask of pure glacial fury. She picked up her phone and sent a single encrypted text message. "It is time," she said, her voice vibrating with authority. "We are assembling the board." I had assumed Ruth was simply a well-connected retired litigator, but I was about to discover the true depth of her network. Within an hour, 3 people arrived at Ruth's back door. They moved with the quiet, unassuming grace of people who preferred to operate in the shadows. Ruth introduced them quickly. There was Arthur, a retired forensic accountant, who had spent 30 years dismantling organized crime syndicates for the Treasury Department. There was Cynthia, a former federal prosecutor, who specialized in complex financial fraud. And finally, there was Evelyn Vance. Meeting the ruthless forensic divorce attorney in person was a completely different experience. Evelyn wore a sharp, tailored suit and carried a titanium briefcase. She moved with the predatory confidence of a great white shark sensing blood in the water. Ruth's dining room was instantly transformed into a high-stakes legal war room. Arthur plugged a heavy encrypted laptop into the wall and connected it to my secure offshore drives. Cynthia spread massive sheets of chart paper across the mahogany table. Evelyn sat at the head of the table, opening her briefcase and pulling out pristine legal pads. "We are not filing for a divorce," Evelyn announced, her eyes locking onto mine with terrifying intensity. "We are dropping a nuclear bomb on a criminal enterprise. I want every single data point, Bethany. Do not leave out a single transaction." Arthur began extracting the IP logs I had captured. He cross-referenced the digital fingerprints Jared had left when initiating the fraudulent second mortgage and the massive commercial credit line. As a data analyst, I was accustomed to working alone building spreadsheets in the quiet isolation of my home office. But working with this elite team of financial and legal predators was exhilarating. Arthur's fingers flew across his keyboard as he traced the money. He proved that the IP addresses matching the loan applications originated directly from Jared's personal laptop and Barbara's boutique computer. He uncovered that they had not just used my social security number for the loans. They had actively forged income verification documents, manipulated tax returns, and created phantom revenue streams to make the failing boutique look profitable. "This is textbook wire fraud," Cynthia noted. "They crossed state lines using digital banking portals. That triggers federal jurisdiction. The FBI Financial Crimes Division is going to devour them." Next, we reviewed the high-definition video from the midnight break-in. Evelyn watched the footage of Jared smashing through the drywall with a crowbar. She watched Barbara carefully stamp my forged signature onto the legal documents. She watched Monica gleefully shove my grandfather's heirloom jewelry into her designer tote bag. Evelyn paused the video right on Barbara's face, capturing the exact moment the forged stamp hit the paper. "This single frame is worth 10 years in federal prison," Evelyn stated, her voice tight with satisfaction. "It proves premeditation, conspiracy, and active forgery. Combined with the financial logs Arthur is pulling, we have an absolute irrefutable chain of evidence. They cannot claim ignorance. They cannot claim financial misunderstanding. This is a coordinated malicious theft." The final piece of the trap was the audio recording from my kitchen. Evelyn connected a small, high-fidelity speaker to my phone and played the entire intervention. The dining room fell completely silent as Jared, Barbara, and Monica's voices echoed through the space. The experts listened to my husband threaten to take my daughter away. They listened to my mother-in-law weaponize my medical history. They listened to the explicit, undeniable extortion. "Sign the document or we destroy your life." When the recording finished, Cynthia leaned back in her chair, shaking her head in sheer disbelief. "They handed you the murder weapon with their fingerprints all over the handle," she said. "Extortion across domestic lines, specifically threatening to weaponize state agencies like Child Protective Services, is a massive felony." Evelyn stood up and began pacing the length of the dining room. She was practically vibrating with aggressive energy. "Here is the strategy," she declared, pointing at the chart paper. "We are going to separate the legal actions to maximize the devastating impact. First, the family court trap. I am drafting an emergency ex parte custody order for Lily. Based on this extortion recording, no judge in the state will grant Jared unsupervised visitation. We are also filing an emergency restraining order. Jared will be legally barred from coming within 500 feet of you or your daughter. But we are not going to serve these papers conventionally. We are going to hold them until the perfect moment." Cynthia stepped forward, taking a red marker and circling the financial data. "While Evelyn handles the domestic destruction, Arthur and I are packaging the federal case. We are compiling the IP logs, the video of the forgery, and the financial audit into a comprehensive dossier. I have a direct contact at the FBI field office who owes me a very large favor. We are going to bypass the local police entirely. This is a federal racketeering and wire fraud case. The moment the FBI sees this video, they will immediately issue grand jury indictments for Jared, Barbara, and Monica. They will freeze every single bank account associated with the boutique." We spent the next 4 hours meticulously building the trap. I provided Arthur with all the encrypted passwords he needed to verify the safety of my offshore accounts. My money was completely locked down, entirely untouchable by Jared or the fraudulent creditors. Evelyn drafted the divorce papers outlining absolute fault and requesting total asset recovery. She included a clause that would force Jared to assume the entirety of the fraudulent debt he had accumulated in my name. Every single document was double-checked, verified, and sealed in Evelyn's titanium briefcase. The legal guillotine was sharpened, polished, and ready to drop. The hardest part of the strategy was the timeline. Evelyn insisted that we wait exactly 1 week. Jared was going to spend the weekend frantically trying to use the voided power of attorney document I had signed. By Monday, he would realize the bank had rejected the decoy signature. He would panic, but he would not suspect that I knew the truth. He would assume it was a bureaucratic error. He and his mother were planning to host a massive charity gala at the Oak Ridge Country Club the following Friday. They were intending to use that event to solicit fraudulent investments from the local elite. Evelyn, Cynthia, and Ruth agreed that the gala was the absolute perfect venue for the ambush. We were going to let them gather all their wealthy victims in one room, and then we were going to execute the federal sting on live stage. By mid-afternoon, the evidence was secured. I thanked the incredible professionals who had just saved my life and wrapped Lily in her winter coat. Ruth placed a warm hand on my shoulder. "You just have to play the part for a few more days," she reminded me. "Keep your head down. Let his ego blind him to the danger." I nodded, feeling a profound, untouchable calm wash over my body. I walked back across the lawn, stepped into my kitchen, and prepared to spend the next 6 days living with a monster who was unaware his extinction was already scheduled. Monday morning broke with a deceptive, icy stillness. Jared strutted around the kitchen in his tailored navy suit, exuding the smug confidence of a man who believed he had successfully conquered his own household. He kissed my cheek, told me to rest my fragile mind, and patted his breast pocket, where my voided power of attorney document rested. I watched him pull out of the driveway, counting the minutes until his arrogance collided with federal banking regulations. By 10 o'clock, I was logged into my secure dashboard watching his digital footprint. I tracked his login attempt at the local bank branch. I watched the system flag the transaction in real time. I imagined the exact moment the loan officer informed him that the signature did not match the biometric security protocols, and that the document was legally invalid due to an incorrect date and a fictitious middle initial. He returned home that evening, looking like a man who had been punched in the throat. The confident strut was gone, replaced by a frantic, barely concealed panic. He poured himself a massive glass of scotch and paced the living room. When I asked if everything was all right, he snapped at me, blaming incompetent bank tellers and bureaucratic red tape. He told me the bank required additional processing time and that I was not to worry my pretty stressed head about it. He demanded I focus entirely on preparing for the Oak Ridge Country Club charity gala on Friday. He insisted that our family needed to project absolute wealth and stability. He had no idea his panic was music to my ears. Over the next 3 days, the house became a chaotic staging ground for their delusions of grandeur. Barbara and Monica practically moved into our dining room, transforming it into a command center for the upcoming gala. They ordered massive floral arrangements, finalized premium catering menus, and coordinated with luxury event planners. They were spending money they did not have, charging it to credit accounts that were teetering on the edge of default. I played the role of the docile, recovering wife to absolute perfection. I served them coffee, nodded at their extravagant plans, and quietly absorbed every single detail they discussed. They were so blinded by their own narcissism that they treated me like a piece of invisible furniture. To them, I was just a broken vessel they had successfully emptied. They openly discussed the guest list in front of me, completely disregarding my presence in my own kitchen. It was a carefully curated collection of the wealthiest, most influential residents in our suburban community. Doctors, real estate developers, and local politicians were all receiving VIP invitations. Barbara boasted about how she had personally called the country club president to secure the grand ballroom, utilizing her fake charm to bypass the usual waiting lists. Monica bragged about the custom silk gowns they were having tailored, loudly debating whether sapphire or emerald would look best under the ballroom chandeliers. They even hired a professional photographer to document their triumph. I listened to them discuss renting luxury sports cars to park at the entrance, creating a total facade of untouchable opulence. It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation designed to dazzle their marks into absolute submission. I took mental notes of every vendor they mentioned, quietly cataloging the names to provide to the federal investigators later. The sheer scale of their spending made no logical sense for a failing boutique owner and a regional sales director who had just been locked out of his fraudulent credit lines. My analytical brain screamed that a crucial variable was missing from this equation. They were not just throwing a party to show off, they were hunting. On Wednesday afternoon, while Jared was at his office scrambling to find a back door into my frozen accounts, I slipped into his home study. He had left his secondary laptop on the desk, assuming his simple numeric password would keep me out. It took me less than 30 seconds to bypass his security. I navigated straight to a hidden folder labeled Oak Ridge Expansion. What I found inside elevated my local domestic dispute into a massive multi-million-dollar federal crime. I opened a glossy 50-page PDF document titled Investment Prospectus. It was a beautifully designed, entirely fabricated financial pitch. Barbara and Monica were not just hosting a charity gala to raise a few $1,000s for local schools. They were launching a fraudulent franchise opportunity. The prospectus claimed their boutique was generating record profits and expanding into a national brand. It included fake revenue charts, falsified tax returns, and projected profit margins that defied all economic reality. I scrolled through the pages analyzing the fraudulent metrics. Jared had essentially fabricated a multi-million-dollar corporate valuation out of thin air. He had used my advanced data visualization software to render legitimate-looking graphs, twisting the grim reality of their massive debt into an illusion of exponential growth. But the most damning piece of evidence was the investment structure. They were asking the wealthy gala attendees for minimum buy-ins of $100,000 each to fund this fake expansion. I sat in Jared's leather chair, my eyes scanning the data with cold, clinical precision. The math was brutally simple. Jared realized the bank was stonewalling his fraudulent second mortgage. He knew the massive commercial loans they had taken out in my name were coming due, and they had absolutely zero capital to pay them. The gala was a desperate high-stakes Ponzi scheme designed to keep them out of bankruptcy. They planned to collect hundreds of thousands of dollars in seed money from the country club elite on Friday night. They would use that stolen cash to pay off the immediate fraudulent debts they had racked up using my social security number, keeping the banks quiet for a few more months, while they figured out their next scam. They were going to defraud their own friends, neighbors, and business associates to cover the tracks of their domestic theft. They were building a house of cards on top of a foundation of quicksand. I immediately uploaded the entire prospectus, the fake financial charts, and the targeted guest list to Evelyn's encrypted server. I called her on my secure phone, explaining the magnitude of what I had just uncovered. Evelyn was silent for a moment before letting out a sharp, predatory laugh. She confirmed that this completely solidified the FBI's involvement. We were no longer just dealing with identity theft. This was an active, coordinated conspiracy to commit massive wire fraud and securities fraud against multiple high-net-worth individuals. The federal agents were going to have a field day. Arthur verified the metadata on the prospectus, proving Jared had authored the fraudulent financial projections himself on his home network. He traced the timestamps perfectly, confirming Jared had worked on this scam while simultaneously orchestrating my fake psychiatric intervention. Cynthia forwarded the investor list directly to her contacts at the Federal Bureau. The net was widening, capturing every single malicious intent they harbored. By moving the goalposts from simple domestic fraud to a highly orchestrated community extortion, Jared had effectively ensured that no judge in the state would ever show him leniency. He was writing his own prison sentence with every fake graph he rendered. I wiped my digital fingerprints from his laptop, taking a microfiber cloth to the keyboard and the trackpad. I placed the computer exactly where I found it, matching the exact angle on the mahogany desk, and walked back downstairs to wait for the evening to arrive. Thursday night arrived thick with suffocating tension. It was the eve of their grand performance. Jared, Barbara, and Monica gathered in my kitchen for a final toast completely oblivious to the federal crosshairs locked onto their foreheads. They drank expensive champagne, their eyes gleaming with predatory anticipation. Jared wrapped his arm around my waist, pulling me tight against his side. He smelled of scotch and desperate arrogance. He told his mother that by Monday morning their financial worries would be a thing of the past. He promised Monica they would go shopping in Paris once the first round of investor capital cleared the bank. He looked down at me, his smile arrogant and possessive, reminding me to wear the diamond necklace he had bought me years ago. The very same necklace I had moved to an offshore safety deposit box days prior. He wanted his wife to look like the perfect wealthy accessory, a silent trophy, to legitimize his status among the country club elite. I smiled back, resting my hand flat against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his lying heart. I promised him I would look absolutely unforgettable. I watched them clink their crystal glasses together, celebrating a victory that would never arrive. They were so intoxicated by their own greed that they could not see the cliff edge rapidly approaching. They believed they were invincible. They believed they had outsmarted the banks, outsmarted their community, and outsmarted me. I excused myself, claiming I needed my beauty sleep for the big night. I walked up the stairs, my spine straight, and my mind perfectly clear. I went into my bedroom, laid out my most stunning evening gown, and set my alarm for the morning. I looked at myself in the full-length mirror, practicing the calm, terrifying smile I would wear when the handcuffs clicked shut around Jared's wrists. I was ready to close this chapter of my life with absolute, undeniable finality. The data was compiled. The federal agents were briefed. The trap was heavily baited. Tomorrow, I was going to pack up my entire life in silence, and then I was going to walk into that ballroom and detonate their world. Friday morning dawned with a biting clear sky, perfectly matching the absolute zero temperature of my heart. Jared was awake before the alarm, practically vibrating with the manic energy of a predator who believed he had successfully cornered his prey. He spent an hour in the master bathroom, trimming his beard and styling his hair, preparing his visual armor for the grand deception he was about to orchestrate. He walked into the kitchen, wearing a tailored charcoal suit, adjusting his silk tie in the reflection of the microwave door. He kissed the top of my head while I poured his coffee, entirely unaware that he was kissing a ghost. He instructed me to spend the day resting my fragile mind. He told me to arrive at the Oak Ridge Country Club no later than 7 o'clock, emphasizing that punctuality was critical for projecting stability to their prospective investors. I smiled, handed him his travel mug, and promised him I would make an entrance he would never forget. The moment his luxury sedan turned out of our subdivision, my meticulous extraction protocol initiated. I did not shed a single tear. I did not hesitate. I picked up my phone and sent a one-word text message to Ruth: execute. Within 10 minutes, a fleet of 3 unmarked heavy-duty moving trucks backed quietly into my driveway. Ruth marched through my front door, flanked by a team of highly efficient, bonded professional movers she had personally vetted through her network. I handed the foreman a detailed, color-coded spreadsheet. It cataloged every single piece of furniture, every appliance, every piece of art, and every fixture that legally belonged to me. I had receipts, inheritance documents, and purchase histories for everything on that list. I walked Lily over to Ruth's house, setting her up in the cozy living room with a stack of new puzzle books and a plate of warm muffins. She was completely shielded from the logistical warfare taking place across the lawn. I returned to my house and stood in the center of the foyer, directing the operation like a symphony conductor. The movers worked with breathtaking speed and silence. They wrapped my antique dining table in thick, moving blankets. They unhooked my high-end kitchen appliances. They rolled up the Persian rugs my grandfather had left me. They dismantled the custom bedroom suites, packed up my extensive library, and cleared out the home theater system I had purchased with my first major corporate bonus. I watched my life being systematically uninstalled, feeling nothing but a profound, soaring sense of liberation. For 7 years, Jared had viewed this house as his personal kingdom, a monument to a success he never actually earned. He had hosted poker nights on my leather sectionals. He had served wine from my crystal decanters. He had lived like royalty on my dime. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the illusion was completely eradicated. The house was stripped down to the bone. The only items left inside the sprawling suburban property were the cheap, battered recliner Jared had brought into our marriage, a few plastic storage bins of his old college clothes, and the massive, ruined mahogany bookshelf in the living room. Without the surrounding furniture to distract the eye, the bookshelf looked absurd, a hollowed-out monument to his midnight burglary. The gaping hole in the drywall where my safe used to reside was now the focal point of the empty room. The echo of my footsteps bounced off the bare walls, a stark auditory reminder that the financial host had finally been severed from the parasite. I walked into the barren kitchen and stood by the island, where just nights prior they had attempted to extort me into signing away my life. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the decoy power of attorney document, the one featuring my fake middle initial and the incorrect year. I tore it perfectly in half. I placed the two pieces neatly on the bare granite countertop. It was the only parting gift I intended to leave him. I locked the front door, handed the keys to the moving foreman, and watched the trucks drive away carrying my assets to a highly secure, undisclosed storage facility. I spent the late afternoon at Ruth's house preparing for the final act of my marriage. I took a long hot shower, washing away the last lingering traces of the submissive, terrified wife I had pretended to be. I dried my hair, styling it in sleek, sharp waves that fell perfectly across my shoulders. I applied my makeup with clinical precision, choosing a bold matte red lipstick that felt like war paint. Then I stepped into the gown I had carefully selected for this execution. It was a floor-length tailored sheath of midnight blue silk. It was elegant, expensive, and completely uncompromising. It did not make me look like a fragile woman recovering from a mental breakdown. It made me look like an apex predator. Ruth stepped into this guest bedroom, holding a small velvet box. She opened it to reveal a stunning, brilliant cut diamond pendant. I had told Jared I would wear the necklace he bought me, the one he wanted me to display as a symbol of his wealth, but that necklace was locked in a federal vault. Ruth fastened her own vintage diamond around my neck, the cool metal resting perfectly against my collarbone. "You look like absolute retribution," Ruth said, her voice rich with pride. She handed me my evening clutch. "Evelyn just texted. The guests of honor are in position. The agents have secured the perimeter. We are ready when you are." I drove myself to this Oak Ridge Country Club, the engine of my car humming a steady, calming rhythm. I did not arrive at 7 o'clock as Jared had commanded. I arrived at 8:30. I wanted them to sweat. I wanted them to spend 90 minutes checking their watches, making excuses to their wealthy marks, and feeling the icy prickle of anxiety creeping up their spines. I pulled up to the grand entrance, handed my keys to the valet with a crisp $20 bill, and walked up the sweeping stone staircase. The double oak doors of the grand ballroom were propped open, spilling warm golden light, and the sound of a live string quartet into the lobby. I paused at the threshold, taking in the scene. Jared, Barbara, and Monica had spared absolutely no expense with my stolen credit. The ballroom was dripping with manufactured opulence. Towering centerpieces of white orchids and imported lilies dominated every table. A massive champagne tower sparkled near the ice sculptures. Waiters in pristine white tuxedos circulated with silver trays of caviar and truffles. The room was packed with the local elite, sipping stolen wine and chatting amiably, completely unaware they were standing inside a massive, federally monitored Ponzi scheme. I stepped into the ballroom. I did not shrink against the walls. I kept my spine rigidly straight, my chin elevated, and I walked directly into the center of the crowd. Heads turned immediately. Conversations paused as people took in my midnight blue gown and the undeniable radiating confidence of my posture. I spotted Jared instantly. He was standing near the champagne tower holding court with a local real estate developer he was desperately trying to defraud. The moment Jared saw me, the color drained completely from his face. His charming salesman smile evaporated. He looked at his watch, then glared at me, his eyes wide with a frantic, barely suppressed rage. He quickly excused himself from the developer and marched across the ballroom floor, grabbing his mother's elbow along the way. Barbara looked equally panicked, her heavily powdered face pulling into a tight, anxious grimace as they intercepted me near the kitchen swing doors. Jared grabbed my arm, his grip bruising and desperate, and yanked me into a secluded, dimly lit alcove away from the prying eyes of their investors. Barbara flanked my other side, her diamond bracelets clinking nervously as she crossed her arms. "Where the hell have you been?" Jared hissed, his voice a venomous low whisper. "You are an hour and a half late, Bethany. You are making us look completely uncoordinated. I have investors asking where my wife is. And where is the necklace I told you to wear? You look entirely too aggressive. You are supposed to be playing the quiet, supportive partner." Barbara leaned in, her cloying floral perfume suffocating in the tight alcove. "You are ruining the narrative, Bethany," she spat, her eyes darting around to ensure no one was watching us. "You are supposed to be recovering. You need to soften your face. Stop standing so stiffly. You are going to scare away the capital we need. Get out there, grab a glass of water, and just smile at whoever Jared introduces you to. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not ruin this for us." I looked down at Jared's hand still gripping my bicep. I did not flinch. I did not apologize. I slowly raised my eyes, meeting his furious, panicked stare, with a gaze so cold and hollow it made him physically recoil. He dropped my arm as if the silk of my dress had suddenly caught fire. "I am not here to play the supportive wife, Jared," I said. My voice was smooth, perfectly modulated, and absolutely terrifying in its calm. "I am not here to smile at your marks, and I am certainly not here to help you steal from these people to cover the fraudulent mortgages you took out against my home." Jared froze, his breath hitching audibly in his chest. Barbara's jaw dropped, her eyes bulging as the implication of my words slammed into her carefully constructed reality. They stared at me, the cognitive dissonance short-circuiting their brains. The fragile, mentally unstable woman they had ambushed in the kitchen was gone. "You need to go back out there," I continued, smoothing the fabric of my sleeve where Jared had wrinkled it. "You need to gather your sister, walk up to that beautiful stage you rented with my money, and enjoy the spotlight. Because I am about to make a toast to family loyalty, Jared. And I promise you, it is going to be the most unforgettable presentation of your entire life." The string quartet was playing a lively classical piece, completely oblivious to the impending destruction. I moved through the sea of wealthy socialites, local politicians, and prominent real estate developers. I nodded politely to faces I recognized offering serene, practiced smiles. I navigated toward the elevated stage at the far end of the room, passing the towering champagne pyramid and the tables dripping with white orchids. At the back of the room, standing near the massive audio-visual control board, I spotted Arthur. The retired forensic accountant was wearing a sharp tuxedo blending in perfectly with the country club staff. I gave him a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. Arthur's hands immediately moved over the control deck, readying the digital guillotine we had so carefully prepared. I climbed the 3 carpeted steps to the stage. A crystal-clear microphone stood on a sleek silver stand in the center. I stepped up to it and tapped the metal grill twice. The sharp, resonant thumps echoed through the cavernous ballroom, instantly cutting through the chatter. The string quartet lowered their bows. Hundreds of faces turned toward the stage, their expensive jewelry catching the light. From my elevated vantage point, I could see Jared, Barbara, and Monica desperately pushing their way through the dense crowd. They were trying to reach the stage, their faces contorted with absolute panic, but the tightly packed tables and throngs of wealthy guests impeded their progress. They were trapped in the audience they had gathered for their own fraudulent scheme. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice projecting smoothly through the state-of-the-art sound system. "For those who do not know me, my name is Bethany Miller. I am Jared's wife. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight to celebrate the proposed national expansion of my mother-in-law's boutique. It is truly humbling to see so many esteemed members of our community gathered in one room." A polite ripple of applause washed over the audience. I smiled warmly, holding the gaze of a prominent local surgeon sitting in the front row. I let the applause fade before continuing. "We hear a lot of talk in the business world about loyalty," I said, pacing slowly across the stage, owning every inch of the spotlight. "We hear about the importance of family, of sticking together, of building a legacy that can be passed down through generations. Jared, Barbara, and Monica have certainly demonstrated a unique brand of family loyalty. They have shown an unparalleled dedication to building their empire, and they have done so by working incredibly closely behind closed doors. They invited you all here tonight because they want you to be a part of that family legacy. They want you to invest your hard-earned capital into their vision. They have handed you beautiful, glossy prospectuses showing record profits and exponential growth. I paused my eyes scanning the room until I locked directly onto Jared. He was 20 feet away, frantically shoving past a state senator, his face slick with terrified sweat. He shook his head at me, a silent, pathetic plea for mercy. I felt absolutely nothing for him. However, I continued my tone, dropping the warm, welcoming facade and hardening into something infinitely sharper. As a professional data analyst, I believe that true partnerships require absolute financial transparency. I believe that before you write a check for $100,000, you deserve to see exactly how the Miller family conducts their business operations. You deserve to see the foundational work that went into securing the initial capital for tonight's extravagant event. I raised my hand and signaled Arthur at the control board. Please direct your attention to the screens. The ballroom plunged into darkness. The massive high-definition projector screens flanking the stage flickered to life. The crystal-clear midnight video illuminated the room. The crowd gasped in unison. On the massive screens, the footage played in stark, undeniable clarity. They saw the interior of my living room. They saw Jared, the charming regional sales director who had just shaken their hands viciously swinging a metal crowbar into my custom mahogany bookshelf. They watched the drywall shatter. They watched him pull the heavy steel safe from the wall and drop it onto my coffee table. Whispers erupted across the ballroom. The polite confusion of the elite crowd rapidly morphed into horrified realization. The video cut to the zoomed-in stabilized footage I had captured through the telephoto lens. The enormous screens displayed Barbara pulling my grandfather's velvet jewelry boxes from the safe. They saw Monica, who had just complimented their designer gowns, greedily shoving stolen diamonds into her tote bag. But the most devastating moment was yet to come. I leaned into the microphone, my voice slicing through the rising murmurs of the outraged crowd. "What you are watching, ladies and gentlemen, is not a home improvement project," I narrated coldly. "That is my husband and his family breaking into my inherited safe at midnight this past Thursday. But please pay close attention to what happens next. This is the financial transparency I promised you." The video zoomed in on Barbara's hands. The screen clearly showed her spreading out commercial loan applications. It showed her gripping the custom ink stamp. It showed her physically stamping my forged signature onto the documents while Jared stood by and supervised the felony. "Those documents are fraudulent commercial lines of credit," I announced to the captive, entirely stunned audience. "They used my stolen social security number and my forged signature to secure massive loans to keep their failing boutique from going bankrupt. But my credit could only take them so far. The money they stole from me ran out. The loans are defaulting. That is why you are here tonight. The beautiful prospectus they handed you is a complete fabrication. The profit margins are entirely fake. You were not invited here to invest in a national franchise. You were invited here to be the victims of a localized Ponzi scheme. They intended to use your seed money to pay off the fraudulent debt they racked up in my name." Absolute pandemonium broke out in the grand ballroom. The wealthy investors, doctors, and local politicians realized simultaneously that they had been targeted for a massive financial scam. Shouts of outrage echoed off the vaulted ceilings. People threw their glossy investment brochures onto the floor in disgust. Jared finally broke through the crowd, reaching the edge of the stage. "Turn it off!" he screamed, his voice cracking with sheer panic. His face was purple, the veins in his neck bulging against his silk collar. "It is a deepfake. She is insane. She is having a psychotic breakdown. Do not listen to her. Turn the screens off right now." Barbara was hyperventilating near the champagne tower, clutching her chest as her social standing was vaporized in real time. Monica was trying to hide behind a floral arrangement, her face buried in her hands, as the local socialites she so desperately wanted to impress glared at her with unadulterated contempt. I did not back away from Jared. I stepped right to the edge of the stage and looked down at him. "You are right, Jared. I said into the microphone, ensuring every single person in the room heard my response. I did have a breakdown. I broke down your entire fraudulent network. But I did not come here alone tonight. I brought a few plus ones who are very interested in discussing your investment strategies. Right on cue, the heavy double oak doors at the back of the grand ballroom swung wide open. The dramatic entrance cut through the shouting of the angry crowd. Evelyn Vance strode into the room carrying her signature titanium briefcase. She was flanked by 6 people. 2 of them were uniformed local police officers secured to handle crowd control. The other 4 were men and women, wearing sharp dark suits with federal badges clipped clearly to their belts. The crowd instantly parted, creating a wide, silent path for the authorities. Evelyn led the charge, her heels clicking rhythmically against the polished dance floor. She marched straight up to Jared, who was frozen in absolute terror at the base of the stage. Evelyn opened her briefcase with a sharp snap. She pulled out a thick stack of legal documents and shoved them aggressively against Jared's chest, forcing him to take them. Jared Miller. Evelyn announced, her voice carrying the lethal authority of a seasoned predator. You have been served. These are emergency divorce filings, an immediate ex parte custody order granting Bethany full and absolute custody of your daughter, and a restraining order barring you from coming within 500 feet of either of them. Your assets are frozen. Your access to the marital home is legally terminated. Jared stared at the papers in his hands, his mouth opening and closing in silent, suffocating shock. But Evelyn was just the opening act. The lead federal agent stepped forward, blocking Jared's path of escape. Jared Miller. Barbara Miller and Monica Miller. The federal agent projected his voice echoing through the stunned ballroom. You are all under arrest. You are being indicted by a federal grand jury for multiple counts of wire fraud, securities, fraud, identity theft, grand theft, and conspiracy to defraud a federal financial institution. Barbara let out a piercing theatrical shriek and collapsed onto the carpeted floor near the champagne tower. Monica immediately started sobbing aggressively, pointing at her brother and screaming that it was all Jared's idea, that she had nothing to do with the forgery, instantly turning on her own blood to save herself. The federal agents did not care. They moved in with clinical precision. An agent grabbed Jared's arms, forcing them behind his back. The sharp, heavy metallic click of handcuffs snapping shut around my husband's wrists resonated through the silent, captivated ballroom. They hauled him roughly to his feet. They read him his Miranda rights, while he stared up at me, his eyes wide, terrified, and entirely broken. The arrogant king of the suburban empire was gone. He was nothing but a common thief in a tailored suit, surrounded by the wealthy community he had tried to exploit. I stood on the stage, looking down at the destruction I had meticulously engineered. I watched the federal agents haul Barbara up from the floor, snapping cuffs onto her wrists, while she sobbed hysterically about her reputation. I watched Monica being dragged toward the exit, her designer gown dragging across the floor. The crowd of elite investors parted silently, watching the architects of their near ruin being marched out of the country club in utter disgrace. I turned away from the spectacle, completely satisfied. I set the microphone gently back onto its silver stand. I smoothed the skirt of my midnight blue silk gown, stepped down from the stage, and walked out the side exit. I did not look back. My work was entirely finished. The trap had sprung, the guillotine had dropped, and I was finally going home to my daughter. I stepped out into the crisp night air, leaving the chaos of the grand ballroom behind me. The heavy door swung shut, muffling the shouts of outraged investors and the harsh commands of federal agents. I walked down the stone pathway toward the valet stand. Behind me, the flashing lights of police cruisers illuminated the Oak Ridge Country Club. I handed the valet my ticket. He stared wide-eyed at the front entrance, watching as Jared, Barbara, and Monica were marched down the sweeping stone staircase in handcuffs. Their designer clothes looked completely absurd against the stark reality of federal custody. The wealthy socialites who had just been sipping stolen champagne were now gathered on balconies, recording the arrests on their cell phones. The social execution was absolute. I climbed into my car, turned the heater on high, and drove straight to a luxury rental Evelyn had secured for me earlier that week. When I arrived, Ruth was sitting on the plush sofa, reading a book while Lily slept peacefully in the adjacent bedroom. Ruth looked up, her sharp eyes assessing my calm demeanor. "It is done," I told her, taking off my coat. "The trap is sprung." Ruth simply smiled, closed her book, and poured us both a glass of water. We sat in silence, knowing the war was officially over. The fallout the next morning was biblical. Local news stations led their early broadcasts with the scandal. Evelyn called me at 8 o'clock in the morning. She was already in her office reviewing the asset freeze confirmations. The FBI had completely locked down every single bank account associated with Jared, Barbara, and Monica. The boutique was raided by federal agents before the sun even came up. They confiscated hard drives, financial ledgers, and inventory. The entire community was in an absolute uproar. The wealthy investors who had attended the gala formed a coalition and immediately filed a massive class action lawsuit against Jared's family, ensuring they would be drowning in civil litigation for the rest of their natural lives. The family court proceedings were equally devastating. Jared tried to fight the emergency custody order from his holding cell. He begged his lawyer to argue that I was an unstable mother. But Evelyn walked into the courtroom and systematically decimated his defense. She played the audio recording of the kitchen intervention. She provided the video of the midnight burglary and the undeniable proof of his extortion attempts. The judge was so utterly appalled by Jared's malicious weaponization of my past medical history that he granted me sole physical and legal custody of Lily immediately. Jared was stripped of all visitation rights. Because Jared had committed federal financial crimes using my forged signature, Evelyn successfully argued that he alone was entirely responsible for the mountains of debt he had accrued. The judge ordered him to forfeit any claim to marital assets to compensate for his theft. I walked out of family court completely free, my finances untouched, and my daughter safe. As the federal investigation deepened, the family loyalty instantly evaporated. The moment they realized the severity of the wire fraud charges, they turned on each other like starving wolves. Barbara told the prosecutors that Jared had masterminded the entire operation and manipulated her into stamping the forged documents. Jared retaliated immediately. He directed his attorney to provide the FBI with emails proving Barbara had originated the idea to tap into my grandfather's safe. He submitted text messages showing his mother complaining about her failing boutique and begging him to find a way to extract my cash. Monica, desperate to avoid a prison sentence, flipped on both of them. She accepted a plea deal, agreeing to testify against her mother and brother in exchange for leniency. The family that had prided itself on its flawless image was now tearing itself apart in federal court documents. 6 months later, the dust finally settled on the ruins of their lives. Jared took a plea deal to avoid a lengthy trial that he knew he would definitively lose. He was sentenced to 84 months in federal prison for wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. The arrogant regional sales director who thought he could outsmart a data analyst was now wearing an orange jumpsuit, completely stripped of his tailored suits and his fabricated power. Barbara managed to avoid prison time due to her age and Monica's testimony. She and Monica were utterly ruined. The boutique was seized and liquidated by the banks to pay off a fraction of their massive debts. They were forced to declare total bankruptcy. Their home was foreclosed upon. The country club formally expelled them, and their entire social circle completely blacklisted them. They were forced to move into a tiny apartment on the outskirts of the city. When Barbara walked down the street, people actively crossed to the other side to avoid her. She had become a complete pariah, forced to live out her days in poverty. While their world collapsed, my world expanded into something beautiful. With my finances fully protected and my grandfather's inheritance securely generating returns. In my offshore accounts, I bought a stunning new house. It was a historic home sitting on 3 acres of wooded property, entirely paid off in cash. The house had large original windows that let in massive amounts of natural sunlight, a sprawling kitchen where Lily and I baked on the weekends, and a dedicated soundproof home office where my freelance data analysis business continued to thrive. I no longer had to hide my success. I no longer had to downplay my intelligence to protect a fragile man's ego. I expanded my client base, taking on lucrative contracts that challenged and fulfilled me. Lily blossomed in our new environment. Without the underlying toxic tension of Jared's manipulations poisoning the air, my daughter became more vibrant, more confident, and incredibly happy. She made new friends at a wonderful private school. At 5 years old, she simply accepted that our lives were better, quieter, and filled with genuine love. I made sure her world was completely insulated from the ugly realities of the federal court system. She had a mother who was present, secure, and entirely unbreakable. Evelyn, Cynthia, and Arthur remained a part of my life. The legal and financial predators who had helped me orchestrate my survival became cherished mentors. We occasionally met for lunch, trading stories and celebrating the flawless execution of our strategy. They had taught me that vulnerability is not a weakness unless you allow the wrong people to weaponize it. I had learned to trust my own data, to trust my instincts, and to never ignore a discrepancy. The summer evening was perfectly warm as I stepped out onto the wraparound porch of my new home. The crickets were chirping softly in the tall grass, and the sky was painting itself in brilliant shades of violet and gold. I carried 2 crystal glasses and a bottle of expensive vintage red wine. I set the glasses down on a small wrought iron table situated between 2 comfortable rocking chairs. Ruth walked up the wooden steps of the porch. After the dust had settled on the federal indictments, I had convinced Ruth to sell her property in the old neighborhood and move into the beautiful renovated guest cottage sitting on my new estate. I wanted the woman who had saved my life to spend her twilight years in absolute comfort, surrounded by people who genuinely valued her razor-sharp mind and her unyielding loyalty. She settled into the rocking chair opposite mine. I poured the dark, rich wine into the crystal glasses. I handed one to Ruth and took the other for myself. We looked out over the sprawling, peaceful lawn. There were no secrets hidden behind the walls of this house. There were no financial predators lurking in the shadows. There was only the quiet, hard-earned security of a life completely rebuilt on truth. Ruth raised her glass, the crystal catching the fading light of the setting sun. She looked at me, her eyes just as sharp and observant as they had been on that freezing midnight in her second-story bedroom. To the data, Ruth said, a small knowing smile playing on her lips. "It never lies." I smiled back, feeling a profound, untouchable peace settle deep into my bones. I raised my glass, clinking it gently against hers. "To the guillotine," I replied softly. I took a sip of the wine, letting the rich flavor wash over my tongue. I leaned back in my rocking chair, listening to the quiet rustle of the wind through the trees. I had walked through the fire, outsmarted the monsters, and built an empire of my own. The taste of justice was infinitely sweet, and my future was finally completely mine. The most profound lesson from walking through this financial and emotional nightmare is that true security never comes from blindly trusting the title of family. We are conditioned to believe that the people closest to us, our spouses and in-laws, are inherently safe. But sometimes the comfortable walls we build to keep the monsters out are actually locking us inside with them. When profound betrayal strikes, our first instinct is often explosive anger. We want to scream, confront, and demand immediate answers. But as Ruth wisely taught me, anger gives your enemy a warning. Evidence gives you a guillotine. By choosing cold, calculated strategy over immediate emotional gratification, you reclaim your power and protect your future. Furthermore, your vulnerability is never a liability unless you allow the wrong people to weaponize it. Past struggles and mental health battles can be twisted into tools for extortion by predators. But recognizing that manipulation allows you to see your own resilience. You are not broken because you once needed help. You are unbreakable because you survived it. Blood does not dictate loyalty, and you have the absolute right to sever ties with anyone who treats your existence merely as a resource to be extracted. If you have ever had to smile through a betrayal while quietly plotting your survival, or if you have had to build your own found family to escape a toxic one, I want to hear from you. Have you ever discovered a shocking truth that forced you to completely rewrite your reality and take back your power? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this journey of survival and undeniable justice resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about turning the tables on the people who underestimate you. Remember, the data never lies and your intuition doesn't either.